Hello and welcome to today's episode of Not Defined by Endo. With me, your host, Taniola Ogunro. Today we will be discussing the psychology of sex. This is the topic that makes many uncomfortable. There is stigma when it comes to speaking about any difficulties one is experiencing with sex. However, many endometriosis sufferers are silently experiencing painful sex as a symptom of their disease. I will be speaking today to Dr. Lauren Fogel Mersy. Dr. Lauren is a psychologist, relationship therapist, and certified sex therapist. She specializes in sexual difficulties such as low libido, problems with arousal, orgasm difficulties, and sexual relationship problems. She is currently writing her first book about libido. Her practice is in Minneapolis, Minnesota. If you are currently experiencing painful sex or you know someone who is, then sit back, relax, and let's have a listen.
I just got back from the gym, so.
That's okay. I've also got my face cap on.
Yes.
And it's Saturday, so it's the day to wind down and just take it easy, right? Even though we're still working.
Yes.
Yeah. So thank you so much. It's nice to meet you.
You as well.
One of the things we endometriosis sufferers go through is we
Painful
all
sex.
pain and then painful sex.
Mm-hmm.
And people don't talk about it a lot because yes.
Yes.
When
for a lot of reasons, because of stigma around sex, because it's a woman's issue for a lot of people, like all of that stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So when I saw your page, I was like, I think I definitely want to speak to this lady. And I saw that you post quite a lot of very inspirational content and very, it's a page where people will definitely learn from. So I was like, I have to speak to her.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. And then thank God you said yes. So.
Yeah. Well, painful sex is something that I treat regularly.
Yeah.
I started off studying just general clinical psychology and started to develop more interest in the realm of sexuality and human sexuality and sexual health. And so when I finished my my degree, I came to Minnesota, which is where I am currently, and I studied a 2-year postdoctoral fellowship at the University of Minnesota. And it was basically a specialty training in human sexuality. So that's where I got my start in really specializing in this area. And ever since, I've been mostly, minus maybe about a year in between, practicing full time with sexuality as my specialty, and something that I really enjoy and am passionate about. So, and then it just sort of builds from there. So I expanded from that into doing more studying and work with couples therapy and relationship therapy. And then my background is in general mental health as well.
Okay. And how would you say social media has influenced the direction your career has taken and how you work?
I've actually learned a tremendous amount on social media. And I always like to tell people that you really can curate your own experience on there. So I'm very inactive on Instagram on my personal page, and it wasn't really something I was drawn to. But I started to notice that professionals were developing professional pages and developing a presence on social media. And I can't exactly remember, what brought me to it. I think it was when I started thinking about writing a book, which I'm currently in the midst of doing. Okay. That I thought maybe I should get online and start connecting to people. And it's actually, pulled me in different directions. And I've, read books that I may not have been aware of otherwise. I have met other professionals and people that I wouldn't have otherwise. It's been a tremendous resource for connection and for learning. Yeah. So I think it's really broadened the scope of the work that I do. And it's actually made me a better therapist.
Wow, that's amazing. It's interesting that you say that, because for me as well, I hardly do anything on my personal Instagram. It feels like, I think the last time I updated my Instagram profile was January 2019, like around Christmas, previous Christmas.
Yeah,
I can post there, but I'm very active on Not Defined by Endo, because that's where, you know, I connect with a lot of women, like endometriosis sufferers, and I've learned so much as well from people like you, from professionals, and it's really helpful that we've got this platform, and there's so much learning that can be done without having to maybe go into obviously you still need to go for medical care, like you have to go into medical care, but there's so much you can learn and so much direction you can get from social media. So yeah, right, it's really helpful.
Yeah, and so, I think a lot of therapists are protective because they talk about, you know, it's not therapy. It can't substitute for therapy, but it certainly can be a wonderful resource, and it can be very therapeutic.
Yeah, exactly. So today, like I said, I would like to talk about two main things: sexual health, especially for women that have endometriosis, because one of our symptoms is painful sex, and then just talking about anxiety in general. So I'll start with let's talk about the shame that exists when it comes to talking about, you know, painful sex and how, you know, the experiences of it.
Yeah. You know, shame and sexuality seem to be combined for so many people. And I think that the strongest reason for that is that we don't, in most of our cultures and in most of the places around the world, we don't talk very openly about sexuality. And when we do, we might not talk about it in the healthiest way or in a positive way. And so sexual shame is a really rampant issue for a lot of people. And where it shows up with folks who have pain with sex or painful sex is similar in other ways to other types of sexual shame, which I think is just, you know, comparing ourselves to others and thinking that, you know, it's not supposed to be this way, or there's something wrong with me, or I'm not doing it right. And we kind of go to that place of like blaming ourselves. And then for folks who have, I mean, there's women who have endometriosis, and then also trans men and non-binary people can also have endometriosis, basically anybody with a uterus. But for a lot of women or people who have been socialized as women, they might take on some roles where they feel like it's a duty or an expectation to be sexual with their partner, and that's what they need to do in order to sustain a relationship or fulfill their role. And so it's amazing and very sad, and also makes me angry that so many women have felt like I have to put myself in pain and I have to endure that just because, you know, especially if I have a male partner, I feel like his pleasure comes before my comfort. Yeah. So and then we feel very protective of that and secretive of that. So it's very hard for some people to talk about. And what's amazing is that when you do start to talk about it, that can help lift that shame. Because shame, Brene Brown talks about this, shame thrives in secrecy. So when we're on our own and alone and don't have anyone to confide in, it just festers. Yeah. So we really need to be able to, you know, have some community or talk about it so that we know that we're not alone.
Yeah, definitely. That's my message, and that's what I've been trying to say in, you know, my message, my podcast, and I keep telling people you're not alone. If only you know how many people, it just takes one person to say, this is how I feel, this is what I experience, and then you see that there's loads of us out there that feel the same way or experience the same thing. So yeah, very true. Yeah. So in your practice or your experience, what are the physical, or should I say medical and psychological reasons for painful sex?
Yeah, you know, there's dozens, I think, at this point, of things that can cause painful sex. Endometriosis is one of them. Certainly, you know, menopause can cause sex to be painful with the changes in hormones. After giving birth to a child vaginally, that can cause pain with sex. Some people respond to birth control in a way that sort of affects their hormones, and that can then sometimes cause painful sex, especially like at the onset of sex, it can be painful. There's something called vaginismus, which is where the muscles get really tight, and it's an involuntary response by the body that basically tenses and braces and makes it really difficult, if not impossible, to have penetrative sex. So those are just a couple of them. And there's really a number of things that can cause it. So, I think one of the most important first steps for people, if they haven't already figured out the source of what their pain is to find the right medical provider and really make sure that they feel like they're working with somebody who is a specialist, because in many cases, just a general practitioner may not be as aware of the multitude of things that can cause pain.
True. Okay.
So it's a number of things, and some people have a couple of things going on. For some people, it's the origin can be hormonal, it can be muscular, it can be something dermatological. Right. So there's nerve issues that can be part of it. So we have to kind of first suss out, what's going on, because each of those things will have maybe a different treatment plan.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So understanding what the problem is like a great first step to knowing what the next step is. Okay, cool. Yeah. So how do you speak? So a lot of us struggle, even on our own, like we said about the shame. How do you suggest or advise that we speak to our partners about this problem? Because I know that there's lots of women that just don't say anything, even to their partners. And your partner is supposed to be your support system, supposed to be the number one person. So how do you advise that we go about this?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing to know is that if we continue to have painful sex, it becomes more and more ingrained in the body. And then the body remembers that sex is painful. And it's this cycle that gets worse and worse over time. And what the body starts to do is it starts bracing for pain. So everything tightens and clenches. And it's the body's way of trying to protect us. And so I think just understanding a little bit more about that's what the body is doing. So the more I do this, some people think, maybe I can just do it more and it'll just go away. Yeah. But it's actually sometimes making it worse, unfortunately. So that's just something to keep in mind. Now, when talking to a partner, when it comes to talking about sex as a whole, like the sexual relationship in general, I often recommend to do that when you're not in the moment of it. So find a comfortable spot at the table or the couch or something like this, and, have clothes on and, have a conversation maybe when it's not in the moment. So it feels a little bit more intentional and maybe a little bit less vulnerable. So sitting down and saying, hey, I've been noticing something and I'm not sure what's going on and I want to look into this, but I think maybe we should figure this out first. One of the first things that we recommend at the clinic that I work at, which has both psychologists and medical providers, is we recommend stop having penetrative sex if it's causing pain, because we don't want to reinforce that cycle. Yeah. And so for a lot of people, that's such a relief because they don't want to be in pain. Yeah. But they also sometimes feel like, well, I don't want to be the one to, deny my partner sex or to be the one to make that decision. So sometimes it's almost like giving people permission that they don't have to do this anymore. Yeah. But we get to make that decision too. We get to say, I am not willing to put myself in pain. And that kind of leads into what sex therapy becomes, which is initially finding some maybe other ways to be sexual or intimate that doesn't involve pain. Yeah. And that basically becomes the foundation. What I tell a lot of people is, the rule right now is don't do anything that causes pain, and anything else that you enjoy that doesn't hurt, just whatever you want. Yeah. So I think, I think that's an important piece, and sexuality for a lot of people is so much more and broader than just penetrative sex. And so I think that's something to include in a conversation with a partner, and just saying, this doesn't mean that we have to be abstinent from sexual contact, but maybe we need to switch up what we're doing for now until this issue has more treatment, or until we've started some treatment plan, or until we have a better sense of what we should do to move forward.
Okay.
Because what happens is we end up unintentionally getting ourselves further and further away from being able to have pain-free sex, because now the body is starting to recognize the sexual experience as a threat.
Yeah. There's something you said that made me have a question when you were talking about the different causes of painful sex. And I was thinking of the fact that some women find that they do not get is it stimulated, so they don't get wet at all. And that's also, I think that's usually a bit of a reason sometimes for why it's painful. So I think I would like to know why does that usually happen? And is there like something they can do about it?
Absolutely. Yeah. Lack of like adequate arousal and stimulation can be absolutely a reason. And there's a saying out there, I don't know its origin, but without, adequate arousal and lubrication, it's like trying to go down a water slide with no water.
Yeah.
You're not going to go very far, or it's not going to feel so fun.
No, it's not.
So, the things that can contribute to how lubricated we get can be, very different things. Sometimes it's that we're not getting enough stimulation, that we're just not doing something that we find arousing.
Yeah.
But sometimes we could be very into it mentally, but our body is just not showing those signs of arousal. And that is actually very normal. It's called arousal non-concordance. And it means that sometimes, there's what our brain is doing and what our body's doing, and they don't always match. So if we're mentally into it and we want to be doing that, and our body is maybe not as lubricated as we'd like, this is where lube comes in and is a wonderful resource.
Yeah.
I will say though, and I'm not sure about the brand differentiation across countries, but I will say that there are certain lubes that are more recommended than others based on what their ingredients are. And so you might want to do a little bit of Google searching before you pick up just something at the pharmacy or the store, just to get a little bit of education around lubricant ingredients, because sometimes what they sell just over the counter can have some things that can cause bacteria or infection or irritation. Yeah. And so not all lubes are created equal. And so there's quite a few different companies that have ones that are more highly recommended.
Okay. Is there anyone that you would recommend to your patients? Any brands that you really like and you think are safe and good to be used?
Yeah, the top two that I like are, so for a silicone-based one, which is nice because it stays slippery longer, because basically silicone is sort of inert. It doesn't get absorbed into the body. So it stays on the surface of the skin longer. And the company that I like is called Uberlube.
Okay.
And so I'm not sure if you can get that across the globe, but I do know that you can find them online and see if they sell in your area, or maybe purchase through their online shop.
Okay.
So Uberlube is a great one. The only downside is that because it's silicone, it's not going to get absorbed. So if you're somebody who has a lot of vaginal dryness, it's really not going to do much for that. Okay. So sometimes it's nice to have a water-based lube, because the water-based lube will get somewhat absorbed into the skin and the tissue. Yeah. And so that can sometimes help as having like a moisturizing effect. The one that I like here in the US, I believe it's an American company, is called Good Clean Love.
Okay.
And they have an online presence as well. It's in a green bottle. And the one that I recommend is called Naked. That's the one that has just sort of the simplest ingredients, and it's mostly organic, and again, can kind of have a moisturizing effect as well.
Okay. Here in the UK, I think there's one called Yes, Yes, Yes Organic.
I was just going to say that is the one that I'm aware of in the UK, and I do like that brand as well.
Yeah, it's good as well.
And they fit under that, the criteria for having more body safe, non-toxic ingredients.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. that's a good one.
Thank you. So let's talk about the place of sex toys.
Yes.
When it comes to painful sex, like the Unut ring, everyone's been talking about that one online, and a few pelvic therapists and friends of mine have talked about it. So what do you think about them, and do they really help, or to improve?
The Onut is such a great it's a great aid. I say it's it's not exactly a toy, because it's maybe, I mean, it could be a toy, but it's more of an aid. It's more of a, it's like
an aid.
An accessory.
Yeah, an accessory. Yeah,
so,
I agree.
Emily Sauer is the one who started the Onut, and she has her own personal history of painful sex. And so she really saw a need out in the world for a product like the one that she ended up designing. And I actually helped kickstart the product when she was designing it, because I thought it sounded great. Yeah. And I met her at a conference a couple of years ago, and it just sounded like such a great idea. So I think it's one of the best that I've seen on the market for the actual product that it is. So it's basically a buffer or a bumper.
Okay.
And so what that does is, if you have either a penetrating partner, like with a penis, or if you're using a toy like a dildo or something like this, the Onut goes around that to the base, and it basically is stackable. And I think there's 4 pieces to it. It's very stretchy silicone, so it's pretty comfortable. And it basically helps you to tailor the depth of penetration. Okay. So if you are somebody who notices that you have more pain with more depth, and the further in that you go, this is a really nice aid for that, because it gives you a little bit of peace of mind to control that, both for you and then for a penetrating partner. They don't have to worry so much, is it going too far in? So it can give you a nice peace of mind, and it's customizable so that you can add or subtract the rings based on what's comfortable.
Okay.
Other bumpers and buffers that I've seen before tended to be a little bit larger. They were a little bit firmer, so they may not have been as comfortable. So I think it's a fantastic product, and I have one in my office that I often will show my clients. And I've heard really good things about it from people who have tried it out. So I think it's fabulous. But I do think it's important to keep in mind what its purpose is for. So if you are somebody who has pain more at the vestibule, which is right at the opening into the vaginal canal, this may or may not do much for you, because that's right at the opening.
Yeah.
So it just sort of depends what your needs are. And if you're having vestibular pain, which is like right at that opening, then that requires, treatment first before trying something like an Onut.
Okay. All right. Interesting. I was always curious about it.
Yes.
Onut, like how does it really work? What does it do for people? So it's kind of nice to speak to someone that was part of, the process of bringing it to market as well. That's really amazing.
Well, I just gave her a little bit of money. I can't say that I really helped design or do any, but I was very fond of the product from the beginning. And I think that it's a great resource for people. It's also a nice thing to have if you are someone who has been abstaining from sex for a while, or penetrative sex, I should say. And you're trying to reintroduce that now, and your medical providers or your team has said, okay, I think you're ready to revisit that again. Yeah. It can also be a nice aid for breaking that up basically into smaller pieces, so it doesn't feel like all at once. Yeah. So it's sort of a nice way to break that down so that you can kind of go at your own pace. So it can also be used really nicely for that purpose as well.
Okay. Are there any other accessories that we haven't talked about that can help with some painful sex?
I'm trying to think of accessories. Nothing that's coming to mind per se, but I do want to mention that, if vaginal sex is painful, we might want to spend more time exploring clitoral stimulation.
Okay.
And there are toys. I mean, there's dozens and hundreds of toys that can be used for that. And that's something that's used externally. So some people will experience pain more internally or at the vaginal opening, but they're fine with clitoral stimulation. So that might be something to explore in the meantime, while you're trying to figure out how to treat the endometrial pain or the vaginal pain.
So my final question for sexual pain
Sure.
is I saw something that you wrote online about something called the polyvagal theory. So tell me a bit more about it.
Yeah, so I will give the caveat that I am still sort of a student of the polyvagal theory. It's new to me. And that is actually one of the things that I found and learned about through Instagram that I am tremendously grateful for. So the polyvagal theory is something that was developed or founded by Dr. Stephen Porges in 1994. And basically it has to do with the vagus nerve, not Vegas like Las Vegas, but VAGUS. Okay. And that is our 10th cranial nerve. It's sort of the back of the neck. And what it does is our understanding is that it basically shuts on and off our survival response. So like fight, flight, freeze. Yeah. And then, if we're in a calm state, then it's basically in that sort of rest, digest, calm space. Yeah. And so a lot of people have heard of fight or flight or freeze. So this theory really explains it in more detail and really goes into the neuroscience and, the nerve itself and sort of what mediates it. What's really interesting about that is how much that can affect our sexuality and then also our mental health as well. So if your body and the vagus nerve is really referring to our nervous system. Okay. So if our nervous system is in a state of survival, if it's in a fight, flight, freeze response, that's going to affect our ability to be interested in sex and to get aroused with sex, because we're designed to first survive and then do the other things. Yeah. So it's not, it wouldn't make sense from a biological standpoint to get aroused if you were in a life or death situation. Yeah. The problem is our brains and our current living situations are often not the same kind of survival situations that we had, back in prehistoric days or pre-colonial days or, many, many years ago. And so our nervous system will sometimes, it's almost like it's misfiring. It's sort of on high alert, looking for things that could be threatening. And so we kind of get stuck between real threat and perceived threat. Yeah. So when we're going through, our day-to-day lives, many of us are actually in survival mode. We're just go, go, go. Don't even think about it. On to the next thing. And that's not the most conducive for sexual response. So I've been sort of exploring how that might affect our sexuality and then how to translate that into things that people can do to better their sexual experience. And what's interesting is, and I'm still kind of reading up on this, so we're in a parasympathetic state, which means the rested, relaxed, calm, and safe zone. And we need to be in that state for mainly for desire and arousal. We actually kick into a sympathetic response when we have an orgasm. So it's kind of interesting how that shifts into more of a, like the fight or flight system sort of shuts on when we have our climax. And then we go back into sort of a rest state or even like a sort of freeze state where we just want to curl up and kind of shut down. Yeah. So really interesting. So I'm slowly learning about that. There is a podcast called the Polyvagal Podcast, and folks can find that in the store or the app or whatever, and to learn more. But it's fascinating, and it really might explain some things about sexuality and also mental health.
Yeah, I'll definitely go look for that. Yeah, interesting theory, and it kind of makes sense when you think about it. And I guess if we constantly, like you said, live in a sympathetic state, so fight or flight, it makes sense that our bodies are unable to then enjoy pleasure or, the sexual experience. So,
right.
Yeah. And then we basically go into anxiety mode, which takes me to the questions about anxiety.
Absolutely. Nice segue.
I know. Now let's talk about anxiety.
Sure.
So, to stay or to come out of the anxious state, how do we set boundaries for ourselves? So if it all has to work together, every part of our lives have to work together for us to kind of be in a rest and digest state. So what advice do you have for us to set our boundaries to protect our health?
So I think the trickiest thing about this is that it's going to be different for everybody. So I wish there was like one universal, like just do this thing and everything will be good. And, I think the ways that we handle our mental health needs are as varied as we are as humans. But there does seem to be some things that tend to be more universal. And they tend to be based on the nervous system, because there are certain things that will actually stimulate the vagus nerve and help us shift state. So, and then, around setting boundaries would basically be, carving out the time for that, or communicating the importance of making time for that, or, letting other people know that I need to make sure that I preserve time to do some of those things. The things that have, and I think we're still sort of learning about this stuff, because 1994, while that sounds like a while ago, in like a science realm, that's kind of new. So I think we're still figuring some of this stuff out. But from what I've read so far, there are certain things that tend to stimulate the vagus nerve or tend to help us enter that calm state. And it's really interesting. A lot of it has to do with extending our out breath. So an extended exhale. Okay. And I think the origin of this is that if you were truly in a real threat situation and you had to run or fight or, get away, you would likely not be so able to take a deep breath and have like a very long and extended exhale, because you would be breathing from your chest and you would be like ready to run. Yeah. So I believe that the origin of that is that sort of triggers the body to realize like, oh, okay, we're actually able to do this. So we must be all right. Yeah. So things that extend the exhale are practicing and learning deep belly breathing or diaphragm breathing. Okay. And really practicing. So it's in through the nose and then extending the exhale out through the mouth, and actually practicing and training your body to breathe more from the belly than from the chest. So that's something, and you can go on YouTube and find a bunch of videos about how to breathe from the belly and do deeper breathing. But things that also will produce an extended exhale are singing and humming and talking and chanting. All of those things we end up kind of putting more out than we're taking in. And basically your inhale is just to produce the next sound.
Yeah, that's true.
So there's a lot of healing that comes from singing and talking and chanting and humming. And so for those of you who find yourselves doing that, particularly in times of stress, that is your body's way of trying to regulate itself. That's really quite a beautiful thing. It's amazing. Apparently, and I don't fully understand the science of this, but I'm just starting to kind of dive into that with some of the reading I'm doing. Cold water is sometimes really helpful. It sort of gets us out of that fight or flight. I'm not exactly sure how or why, but particularly cold water to the face or to the back of the neck. And so like a cold compress or cold cloth, or just splashing some cold water on your face when you're feeling really heightened anxiety, sometimes that can really help ground us in the moment and take us out of that mode.
That's such a simple hack. And I never thought about it, but it's true, because when you feel nauseous, sometimes you splash cold water on your face.
Yep.
You have a migraine, you put cold compress on your head. So
that's right.
So I guess that makes sense. And that's something that if anyone asked me, how do I get rid of my anxiety? I wouldn't say just splash cold water on your face.
I know, right? I think it's most useful, especially in times of intense anxiety. So like when feeling panicked or feeling like this really strong sort of response, it's maybe most helpful in those situations. And then some folks are even doing this on a more regular basis through either cold water therapy, where they're going for like dips in pools that are kept at a cold temperature. Or what you can do is at the end of your shower or your, it wouldn't really work with a bath. So maybe end of the shower, put it on cold for a minute, just let that all go over your body and then turn it off. So maybe like a 10-second cold immersion. I'm not really there yet. I'm kind of freaked out by that.
Yeah, I don't think I'm going to be doing that anytime. No, thanks.
No, I know. But it's nice to know that that's available. And especially, if you're at work or out and about, if you're feeling some of those symptoms of anxiety that are building up, just, go to a restroom and find yourself some water to splash on your face, and that might help as a reset.
Yeah. So tell me about the mental load.
The mental load, yes.
Yeah, it's a big topic on your profile, and I'm really interested in understanding what it is and how do you bring it up with your partner. Just tell me everything.
Sure. Yeah. So the mental load is something that I first learned about probably like a year and a half ago. And the term that I was first introduced to was emotional labor. And I read a book by Gemma Hartley, who wrote a book called Fed Up, and it's all about emotional labor. And so mental load, emotional labor, invisible labor, these are some synonymous terms. Sometimes there's some nuances between them. But the idea is that our day-to-day lives, particularly in a relationship and running a household and a family, requires a tremendous amount of attention to detail, energy, physical labor, emotional labor, mental labor. And this is part of what's exhausting us.
Yeah.
The day-to-day sort of grind is what we call it. But the number of things that we have to pay attention to and think about is unbelievable. And it's part of why we're all so exhausted and sick and struggling and anxious. And traditionally, this largely fell on women. And what we found today is that even though there have been social changes where more and more women since, the 50s, 60s, women are now working full-time out of the house in larger numbers than ever before, they are still not abdicating that responsibility at home. And so they still take on a disproportionate amount of the household responsibilities, the childcare responsibilities, and just making sure that everything is running smoothly and working well. And so this is a large part of it. It's something that I'm writing about now. This is a large part of why some people struggle with their desire for sex, because it's like, oh my goodness, I just barely, got to the bed and I'm exhausted. And I just sat down, and like the last thing that I want to do is be sexual right now. Like I just need to breathe. So the mental load really affects everybody. And this affects couples. It affects people who are single. It affects people who have children and people who don't have children. It's everything that we do to take care of running our lives. So it's from the little things like replacing the toilet paper and, making sure that the fridge is stocked to, over the holidays, a lot of the labor falls on women traditionally, sending out cards and decorating and making sure gifts are purchased and everybody gets something that they want, and, putting together a meal and making sure you call family and say hello. All of these things, they take energy and they take work. And a lot of it is invisible. And the invisibility is because many of us take it on and just take it as an assumption that that's just the role we're supposed to do. And we don't even sometimes recognize how much we're doing and what toll it's taking on us. And so I started writing about the give and take that naturally fluctuates in a relationship. So it's usually not just 50-50 all the time.
Yeah.
And someone wrote in my comments, well, this really kind of brings up the mental load. And it was something that I had been meaning to talk about for the longest time, because I've been seeing it circulating my feed for a while. I was like, well, I guess now we're going to talk about this. So the last several posts that I've made are all about the mental load. And it is amazing how many women have reached out to me saying, oh my goodness, like I didn't know that there was a word for it. And I didn't realize that everybody else is feeling what I'm feeling, that this is exhausting. So, I think the mental load can contribute to relationship dissatisfaction. And we know that to be true. It can affect the desire to be intimate with a partner. And it can also exacerbate some of our physical health because it's keeping us stuck in a fight or flight.
Wow.
So it's a tremendous thing. I just downloaded a couple of other books that I just started reading. One is called Fair Play.
Okay.
Which looks really interesting. And then, oh my gosh, I'm going to forget the name of the other one. I think All the Rage is what it's called. But if folks look up mental load, they'll see more about it. And the hard part is the question that you asked earlier, like, how do you bring that up with the partner? So if assuming you are the person who's taking on more of the mental load, or at least you're perceiving that you are, it can be, then it's mental load to bring that up and to try to do it nicely and to make sure that your partner is not going to be defensive, and to try to, be encouraging that it is in everybody's best interest if the mental load is more shared. And it doesn't have to be, again, 50-50. It has to feel fair to everybody, and fairness is subjective. So it's really about, negotiating. And I have a couple of resources on my Instagram feed for how to do that. But one of them is, if you're listening to this podcast and you're like, oh my gosh, that's me. I need to talk about this. We need to do something. Blame me. I love when people use me, throw me under the bus. Like, I was listening to a podcast, or I saw this post, and she said this thing, and I related to it. And can we talk about this? This is something that I think is affecting us, and maybe it's affecting us in ways that we don't realize. And for the partner who's benefiting from the other one having more of the mental load, it might feel great to them. Or it might seem like, well, what? I don't have a problem with this. Like, this works in my favor. But it actually may not, because particularly the folks that I see, and when I work with couples, if let's say it fits that more traditional dynamic, and it's the female partner that's got, more of the mental load, and then low libido is part of the issue. If those are correlated in any way, and then she has a male partner, if it's that sort of dynamic, and the male partner is saying, I want to have more sex, and she's feeling overburdened, then that would definitely be something that's worth talking about, because it's affecting both of you. It's not just like it affects one person, it affects the whole family.
I think for endometriosis sufferers, I would say they would struggle more with guilt. So the mental load might be on the partner because, they are always sick, and he's always, picking up the slack, taking care of you, taking care of the kids, if you have any. So the mental load might be basically heavier towards him, and then you might feel guilty because you don't know, you can't help it. So I think for many of us, it would be kind of the other, might
reverse
be around. But then rather than feeling like, oh, well, I can't do anything about it, you feel more guilty. So
right. What might be helpful is to actually look at, because it's quite possible that there is still a lot that's being done that is going unseen or unnoticed or undervalued. Because even if you are less able, let's say, to do some of the physical work around the house, or to do some of the errands or certain things because of your physical health, there might be a lot of other things that you are doing that are not being recognized either by you or a partner. And even, things like, so if you do have children, tending to their emotional needs, asking them about how they're doing and showing interest in, what is going on in their lives, that's mental load.
Yeah, true.
And that might be stuff that you're doing, or, if you're at home and you're taking care of ordering things online that the house needs to be replenished, that's mental load. Or, keeping in touch with the in-laws or family because you want to make sure that you have, the next get together is scheduled. That's mental load. So there might be a lot of things that are still there, but they're maybe not as visible. And so the book that I'm reading now, the one that is called Fair Play, talks about, visible equals valued. Like, we will value it once we have to name it first.
Yeah.
And so sometimes it helps to just look at all of those things and really recognize what we are doing.
Very helpful. Thank you. So the books you talked about, Fair Play and All the Rage, right?
I think it's called All the Rage, and then Fed Up by Gemma Hartley.
Okay. Are there any other books you would recommend, both for sexual health and for anxiety, that you could recommend to our audience?
Yes, absolutely. So for sexual health, my favorite book about particularly women's sexual health is called Come As You Are, and that's by Emily Nagoski. And it talks about a whole range of things from desire and orgasms and how stress affects us. And it's just the book that I think every woman should read at some point. I think it's just so valuable. A book specific to painful sex is called When Sex Hurts, and that's by Goldstein, Fogel, and Goldstein. And that one is a really good, it's more of a resource. So it's not something that you would have to read cover to cover. It's more about being an informed patient so that here's all the things that can cause painful sex. Here's the kind of questions to ask your medical provider. Here's the different treatment options. So it's a really nice resource. Okay. And you can probably find that online.
Okay.
And then Becoming Clitorate by Lori Mintz.
Love it.
Is a really good read about orgasm inequality and how so many, particularly women, are maybe less informed about their own bodies and how to have orgasms. And there are still a lot of people out there who expect to have orgasms from penetrative sex. And for a lot of people who have a clitoris, that's not how it works. And so it's a really nice resource to just kind of catch up to, speed with the sex education that many of us didn't get.
Okay. Are there any final words or final advice for women, for our audience?
Yeah, I think, having a team, having the team approach to handling some of these issues. I really am a fan of community care, and it takes a village, and we need a good support system. And that can be, friends and family just sort of knowing what's going on and being there to help out when we need help, but also having a really good care team as well. And so if you feel like maybe your providers are not the most expert in this field, or they're not able to answer some of your questions, it's worth finding people that you feel comfortable working with. And that could involve, gynecology. It could involve somebody who specializes in sexual health. It could involve pelvic physical therapy. Could involve sex therapy. And so I know that that's a lot of things and it's very overwhelming, but I also think it helps to feel less alone and to feel like there's a direction.
Thank you so much, Lauren.
Oh, my pleasure.
And it's a wrap.
I hope you enjoyed this episode today and learned a lot. If you did, I would love to know. Send me comments or even a DM through my Instagram or Facebook page. Share it with your friends and subscribe to the podcast. If you also have any questions to ask or topics you would like me to discuss, feel free to shoot me an email on info@notdefinedbyendo.com. I love to hear from you all. All the resources mentioned by Dr. Lauren can be found in the show notes. Until next time, my name is Teniola, and remember, you are not defined by endo.